Chapter 1. The Aerostorm. Sir Elias Draven awoke to the piercing cry of alarm bells and the distant thunder of hooves pounding stone, his mind hazy from fevered dreams of distant battlefields, visions of blazing starships, and molten metal raining from the sky. He sat up on the damp cot in the infirmary tent, the coarse linen sheets chafing his sweat-soaked skin, and struggled to remember why the stench of ozone and singed flesh still clung to his nostrils. Then it came back to him in a flash of white-hot adrenaline. The sky above Skirich Citadel had split with the roar of invading flyers. Quinari raiders swooping in under magic-laced storm clouds. Arrows had darkened the heavens, each one an ember of death streaking toward the golden pavilion where Queen Selene Aerith stood enthroned. He had been near collapse, bleeding from a shattered shoulder and a wound in his thigh that had burned like acid. But he had pressed on not for glory or for honor, but for the promise he had whispered when he first pledged his blade to the crown. "My life is yours, my queen, until your last breath." And so he remembered his own oath as the volley descended. The Quinari archers unleashing an enchanted storm of jet-black shafts tipped with runic steel, each arrow designed to tear through both flesh and spirit, to shatter wills and bring even the most stalwart defenders to their knees. As one death-dealing projectile arced toward the dais, a collective gasp rose from the palace guard, but Elias's instincts propelled him forward into the aerostorm, his arms raised to shield the woman he served, his body a living bulwark against the hail of dark steel. He had felt the first shaft pierce his gauntlet, then another through the cuirass that had saved his life more than once, and then the final arrow had found its mark in his chest, niching itself between ribs and lodging closer to his heart. Pain exploded in crimson flowers behind his eyes, and he slumped to the marble floor, vision blurring. Yet in his final moments of consciousness he saw the queen's face pale as moonlight, hair cascading like liquid silver, eyes wide with shock and grief. He saw her dismounting the dais, flinging off her silk train, cradling his head in her hands, pressing her lips to the wound as though she could will his life back into his failing body. Then darkness had claimed him, and he had dreamed of distant worlds until the alarm bells pulled him back to consciousness. Now, as the memory faded and the fever broke, Elias rose unsteadily from the cot, his body still aching as though it remembered the horror of that storm of arrows even more vividly than his mind. He dressed in fresh gambeson and mail, each plate polished to a dull gleam, and made his way through the maze of tents where medics and surgeons tended to the wounded. The air was steamy with the fumes of medicinal balms and warmed by lantern light, and the low murmur of prayers mingled with the groans of injured soldiers, a cacophony that underscored the fragility of life in times of war. But Elias moved with purpose, ignoring the lingering pain that throbbed in his shoulder and chest, for today was the day he had long awaited. The day he would stand before Queen Selene once more, not as a dying defender, but as her champion renewed. As he stepped beyond the tent flap and into the open courtyard of the citadel, the clouds parted to reveal a pale sun, its light falling upon the gleaming spires and casting long shadows across the polished stone. Below him, the banners of Skirich, the argent moon on a field of sapphire fluttered in a gentle breeze, a reminder that even in the darkest hour, hope endured. He strode across the courtyard, each footstep reverberating in the hush that fell over the assembled troops. Their armor clinked in unison, weapons held at attention, eyes fixed on the dais where Queen Selene had summoned him. As he approached the grand staircase leading to the throne, memories of that fateful moment returned with vivid clarity. The crack of bowstrings, the hiss of arrows, the chorus of aggravation as the palace guard had reeled back under the assault. He recalled how, even as his body buckled under the weight of mortal wounds, his mind had stayed razor-sharp, issuing commands to flank the archers, to shield the others, to buy time for the queen's escape to the underground vaults. And though the Quinari had retreated in the face of relentless retaliation led by Elias's faltering voice, the cost had been dear. Half the palace guard lost, the outer walls scorched, and the queen herself shaken to her core by the sight of her champion bleeding at her feet. Yet she had not abandoned him. She had knelt. She had tended him. She had vowed to remember his sacrifice for as long as the star song flowed in her veins. At the apex of the stairs, draped in robes of midnight blue embroidered with silver stars, stood Queen Selene Aerith, her cerulean eyes fixed on Elias with a mixture of reverence and something deeper that made his heart constrict even now. The ceremonial hall behind her glowed with torchlight, illuminations of ancient galactic maps stretching across the vaulted ceiling. As Elias reached the dais, the assembled nobles and dignitaries fell silent, their gazes drifting between the queen and her knight. A hush followed him as he knelt once more upon the marble floor, though this time there would be no arrows to catch him off guard. He bowed his head, the sword at his side whispering against the stone like a promise unfinished. Queen Selene descended the steps, her feet silent on the polished surface, and reached him, lifting his chin with a pale hand that was still trembling from that rainy morning. Their eyes met, and she laid a delicate finger against the scar marring his shoulder plate, a jagged line where the first arrow had struck, her touch both tender and resolute. "Rise, Sir Elias," she intoned, her voice carrying through the hall with gentle authority. "Rise, my savior." He obeyed, rising to stand before her, every inch of his frame bearing the silent testament of pain overcome by duty. The courtiers shifted, a murmur rippling through the crowd as they witnessed the bond between queen and knight, an oath sealed in blood, remembered and honored. Amid the flickering torchlight, Selene reached behind her and unclasped the star-forged diadem from her head, placing it in Elias's gauntlet hands with a soft, irrevocable gesture. "With this," she declared, voice bold enough to echo off the vaulted dome, "I bestow upon you not only my gratitude, but the guardianship of my throne and my realm. For as you have bled for me, so too shall you protect all who live under the moonlight of Skirich." Shock and awe rippled through the assembly. The diadem, a circlet wrought from meteoric silver and stardust veins, was said to bind the fate of its bearer to the queen's own life force. For Elias to hold it meant that his life and hers would be entwined forever, that her very breath would echo in his heart, and vice versa. He lifted the diadem with reverent care, his scarred fingers tracing the ancient runes inscribed upon its inner band. A gentle hum of cosmic energy pulsed through the hall, and he felt a warmth bloom in his chest as the diadem settled into place, not upon his head, but across his heart as Selene pressed it there. At that moment, thunder rolled across the vaulted sky outside, and the torches guttered in unison, casting dancing shadows across the marble pillars. The queen stepped back, her silver gown swirling like liquid light, and smiled at him, a smile that held both profound sadness and unwavering hope. "From this day forth," she proclaimed, "let Sir Elias Draven bear the weight of my protection as I bear the weight of his sacrifice. Together, we shall guide Skirich into a new age, where loyalty is honored as fiercely as the stars themselves." A cheer erupted from the assembled crowd, a roar of approval that shook the walls. Yet in the depths of Elias's eyes, there remained a quiet gravity, for he understood the true cost of this honor. He had given his blood once to save the queen, and now he wore her trust as a mantle heavier than any armor. As applause rang around them, the bond between man and monarch was sealed not by ceremony alone, but by the indelible memory of flying arrows and a heart laid bare upon the marble battlements, a memory the queen would never forget. The hall's jubilation faded into a reverent hush as Elias stood, the weight of the star-forged diadem pressed against his chest like a promise carved from the heart of a dying star, and he felt its warmth seep into his veins, knitting together every membrane torn by the Quinari storm. Around him, the courtiers and knights bowed in unison, a living tide of steel and silk paying homage not only to their queen, but to the man who had become her living shield. Yet beneath the thunderous applause, Elias heard a quieter rhythm, his own heartbeat echoing the pulse of the crown, a steady drumline that proclaimed, "You are bound now. Your life is ours, and ours is yours." He closed his eyes for a moment, tasting the mingled scents of melted silver, fresh-laid stone, and the faint copper trace of his own blood, now stilled by the ministrations of the palace healers. When he opened them again, Queen Selene was at his side, her hand resting on his gauntlet with a tenderness that belied the steel beneath both their exteriors. She spoke his name in a whisper meant only for him, a syllable that still carried the tremor of fear from that rain-lashed dawn, and in that quiver he heard every unspoken thank you, every vow to safeguard the realm he had saved. Yet as the echoes of ceremony faded into the corridors of Skirich Citadel, the true storm gathered beyond its walls. From every corner of the empire came word of the Quinari's retaliation raids upon border villages, sabotage of the great skybridges, and whispers of an even darker magic being harnessed to fell those who dared defy the raiders' wrath. Elias felt the chill of foreboding seize his spine as he sheathed his sword, then turned to Celine beneath the vaulted dome, where celestial charts etched in argent lined the ceiling. "My queen," he said, voice low but unwavering. "The arrows I faced were but the beginning. They will strike again, and next time they will aim not for me, but for you, for every soul who looks to this citadel as sanctuary." Celine's cerulean eyes glowed with determination as she drew him close, her cloak of moonlight brushing the marble floor. "Then we shall face them together," she vowed, gaze lifting to the tapestry of stars above. "By your side, Sir Elias, I will stand until the last arrow is spent and the last chant of war is silenced." And there, amid the silent grandeur of the throne room, their shared resolve crystallized like dawn breaking through storm clouds. This was no mere knight's errand or queen's decree, but the forging of a bond unbreakable in life or death. Chapter 2: The Web of Shadows. Before the hour's end, the palace war room thrummed with urgent counsel. Ambassadors in robes of every hue, generals with maps splayed across bronze tables, and spies bearing intelligence inked in hidden ciphers. At its core stood Celine, clad now in a war-forged cuirass of star metal and shadow glass, and beside her Elias, his sword gleaming like frost fire under the chandelier's glow. They faced the assembled lords and captains, their eyes reflecting hope and fear in equal measure, as Celine raised a slender hand and commanded silence. "The Quinari marshal his forces at the Griffin Pass," she announced, voice resonant. "But their true aim is more insidious than outright assault. They seek to unravel our alliances, to pitting neighbor against neighbor until the very fabric of our kingdom is rent." A hush fell over the room as Elias stepped forward, tracing a gloved finger along the depiction of the pass on the map. "I propose a covert strike, team shadows within shadows, to sever their supply lines and dismantle their war magic at its source," he said, tone grave. The council murmured among themselves, and from the back of the chamber, a cloaked figure emerged, Captain Muriel Thorne, master of the Nightblades. With a slight bow, she offered her hand to Elias and Celine both, oath-bound and dagger-sharp. In that fleeting gesture lay the spark of their next crusade, a silent war waged beneath the rioting skies, where trust was as lethal as any blade and betrayal lurked behind every veil. As the first candle guttered and the others flared in its wake, Elias and Celine exchanged a determined glance, two hearts welded by sacrifice, now set to journey into the heart of darkness that threatened their realm. Sir Elias and Captain Muriel Thorne moved to the far side of the war room, their voices dropping to a hush as they pored over the map's smaller insets. Hidden mountain passes scarred by avalanche, ancient aqueduct tunnels carved into the bedrock, and forgotten watchtowers whose hexagonal spires still pierced the jagged skyline. By torchlight, Muriel traced a series of token wards along the route, a lattice of sigils designed to mask their passage from the Quinari's scrying mirrors, while Elias marked safe houses deep within enemy territory, abandoned hamlets where old friends of the crown still dwelled in secret. Each notation carried the weight of clandestine promises, that those shepherding fleeing villagers would be paid in coin and honor, that the ruins of the Temple of Stars would serve as sanctuary for wounded night blades, and that word of their success would spread like wildfire through allied courts to bolster wavering loyalties. Beyond the war room's polished granite floor lay a web of courtyards and echoing corridors where spies whispered in hidden alleys and informants slipped coded parchments beneath sealed doors. It was here the true battle would be fought, in stolen hours and fractured loyalties, where a single misstep could mean torture by flame or a betrayal so deep it would shatter confidence across the entire realm. As the hour grew late and the torches guttered low, Elias allowed himself a moment of rare candor with Queen Celine, who lingered at the threshold, her silver cloak pooling around marble tiles like spilled moonlight. She reached out, fingers brushing the scarred leather of his gauntlet, and in that fleeting touch there was both gratitude and unspoken fear. The fear that the arrow storm was merely a preludium to darker magics, and the gratitude that he had given his life once to save hers and would do so again, without hesitation. He met her gaze and offered a steady reassurance, voicing what he could not bear to etch in any parchment, that as long as breath remained in his lungs, no storm of arrows nor shadows of treachery would stand between her and the safety of Skirich. Behind them, Miriel slipped away to marshal her blade-silent assassins who moved like wraiths along the ramparts while Elias returned to the map, guiding hands and hearts toward a strategy that would demand every ounce of cunning and courage they possessed. For tomorrow, under the veil of a moonless sky, the Nightblades and the Vanguard would slip beyond the eastern gate, into the very lair of the Quinari's warlocks, there to unravel the dark rune forges that fueled the enemy's arrows before they could again blot out the sun over Skirich Citadel. And in that silent promise, the fate of crown and kingdom was entrusted to two steadfast souls bound by blood and oath, ready to walk the razor's edge between triumph and oblivion. Under the cloak of midnight, Sir Elias Draven and Captain Miriel Thorne slipped through the secret sally port beneath the eastern gate, their footsteps muffled by the whispering echoes of ancient stone. Behind them, the lantern-lit courtyard of Skirich Citadel lay silent, its spires and battlements bathed in the silver glow of moons unseen by the Quinari. Elias felt the familiar hum of the star-forged diadem against his breastplate, a constant reminder that his life and the Queen's were forever entwined. Yet in this moment of covert departure it served as both talisman and burden its power a compass pointing toward duty. Miriel's Nightblades followed in shadow, their dark leather cloaks and silent boots blending seamlessly with the jagged silhouette of the craggy hills beyond. Every mile they covered brought them deeper into the enemy's domain, abandoned farms overgrown with thorn briars, sentinel statues half buried in moss, and villages where torches sputtered out at their approach. Elias paused at a crossroads marked by ruinous aqueduct pillars, consulting the scroll that bore the warding sigils mirroring those etched by Miriel's hand. A faint ripple in the air told him the Quinari warlocks' scrying mirrors were blind to their passage, and with a curt nod to his captain, he pressed onward, the lanterns of distant watchtowers swallowed by the night. Their journey carried them to the jagged foothills of the Griffin Pass, where wind-carved archways formed natural choke points once used by mountain guardians of old. Here, Elias and Miriel paused to regroup, their small company forming a tight semicircle beneath the skeletal arches. The Nightblades produced vials of azure draft, a concoction to muffle heartbeats and slow breathing, and distributed dark hooded masks woven from shadow silk, ensuring that no glint of steel nor whisper of cloth would betray them. Elias unsheathed his blade of star metal, its edge humming faintly as if eager for the coming work, and stared up at the looming peaks shrouded in storm clouds that pulsed with the latent energy of hidden rune forges. Ahead lay the lair of the Quinari warlocks, their subterranean foundries forging arrows imbued with deathless enchantments. Elias inhaled the cold, electrified air and felt the weight of their mission settle upon him. To breach the rune forges, sever the enchantments at their source, and return to Skirich before the first dawn. With a final look at Miriel, whose eyes gleamed with resolute steel, he swallowed his nerves and stepped into the maw of the mountains, followed by the silent blades of the Nightblades and the unwavering oath of a knight who would bleed again rather than see his queen fall. Chapter 3. Into the Forge of Night. The cavern mouth yawned before them like the gaping maw of a leviathan, dark and unwelcoming, yet the only path to halting the Quinari's deadly barrage. Inside, the air was thick with the acrid stench of sulfur and ozone, and the floor glimmered with pools of molten or that reflected the dancing patterns of rune light pulsating along the cavern walls. Elias moved at the forefront, every sense strained to catch the faintest whisper of enemy patrols or the telltale hum of arcane machinery. Miriel signaled for the Nightblades to fan out along the ledges above, their daggers poised to sever throat cords or shatter enchanted crystals at a moment's notice. As they pressed deeper, the roar of invisible bellows grew louder, echoing through the labyrinth of tunnels until it coalesced into the steady pounding of hammers striking rune-forge anvils. Elias's heart hammered in response, and he steadied himself on a protruding rock, watching as spectral runes danced across the scales of a massive forge beast, a magical construct forged from obsidian steel and lit by eldritch flame. Beyond it, rows of Quinari warlocks chanted in a guttural dialect, weaving fresh enchantments into arrow shafts laid out in orderly racks. The knight and the Nightblades exchanged silent nods. The moment to strike had arrived. Elias tightened his grip on his sword, its star-metal edge glowing with the diadem's borrowed light, and together they plunged into the heart of the forge, where hope and peril joined in a deadly dance beneath the thunderous roar of dark magic. The clang of hammer on anvil erupted into a cacophony of arcane resonance as Elias and the Nightblades crashed into the central chamber, star-metal blades igniting with the diadem's borrowed luminescence and casting prismatic reflections off the obsidian walls. Quinari warlocks whirled at the sudden invasion, their chanting choking off mid-incantation as jagged bolts of rune fire lanced toward the intruders. Elias pivoted, deflecting a soaring bolt with the flat of his blade, its echoing clang reverberating like thunder through the cavern, and then drove forward in a sweeping arc that shattered the nearest enchanted crystal rack, sending shards of rune-laced glass tinkling across the molten floor. Above, Miriel's Nightblades dropped like specters from the ledges, silent blades finding throats and wrists with lethal precision. Each subdued warlock extinguished another spark of the forge's malignant power. Amid the fray, Elias stormed toward the great forge beast, its obsidian hide rippling with eldritch runes freshly inscribed by chanting craftsmen. Ignoring the searing heat and the roar of the construct's infernal breath, he plunged his sword into a glowing rune at the beast's flank, sending a shockwave of starlight that crackled through the chamber and knocked nearby warlocks off their feet. The creature bellowed, a sound like worlds colliding, but the Nightblades coalesced around it, driving short blades into its jointed plates until its hammering heart ground to an echoing halt. As the forge's pulse slowed, the great crystal arrays overhead once suffused with dark enchantment crumbled into inert dust. Elias, panting and scorched by the blaze, signaled withdrawal, and the company melted back into the labyrinthine corridors just as a tremor cleaved the cavern in two, sealing the main chamber behind a collapse of stone. Guided by Miriel's wards and the diadem's steady pulse, they navigated the shifting tunnels, emerging into the chill night air atop a starlit ridge. Below them, the distant lights of Skirich twinkled like beacons of hope, and though their bodies ached with burn and blood, their spirits soared with triumph, for they had silenced the Quinari's rune forges and tipped the balance in the war's unseen battle. Chapter 4: Dawn of Redemption. As the first pale fingers of dawn brushed the western horizon, Elias and the Nightblades slipped back through the hidden sally port into the courtyard of Skirich Citadel, their arrival heralded by the low hum of restored beacon fires and the rallying cry of victory that rolled through the ramparts. The Citadel's guards, weary but unbroken, fell into formation, their eyes alight with astonishment and gratitude as Elias, cloak singed and armor scorched, strode to the base of the grand staircase. Queen Selene Aerith awaited him on the dais, her silver hair catching the newborn light, her cerulean gown unfurled like a banner of peace, and as he ascended the steps, every lingering ache in his limbs was drowned by the roaring welcome of the people he had saved. Without hesitation, he knelt once more, the weight of the star-forged diadem warm against his breastplate, and Selene descended to meet him, her soft hand brushing away soot from his brow as though it were mere dust. Behind her, the assembled nobles and commanders murmured their praise, but in that hushed moment, it was Selene's whisper that burned brightest in his memory. "You have bled for me once, and now you have bled for us all. Rise, Sir Elias, guardian of Skirich." He rose to his full height, shoulders squared against the dawn, and joined his voice to hers in a vow that echoed off the marble pillars, that Skirich would stand unbowed against every shadow, that its gates would shelter the meek, and its banners guide the lost. As the twin suns broke free of the horizon, their light igniting the citadel in a blaze of gold and sapphire, Elias looked into Selene's eyes and saw not only gratitude, but the unspoken promise of tomorrows earned through sacrifice. In that incandescent dawn, war gave way to hope, pain to purpose, and the bond between queen and knight sealed by arrows and reforged in the forge of night blazed brighter than any star in the firmament. The end. The jubilant roar that greeted Elias's return cascaded through the courtyards and halls of Skirich, carried on the wings of morning light as the citadel awoke to a new age. Beneath the triple-tiered arches of the grand hall, tables laden with steaming bread, roasted meats, and flagons of spiced mead were set out in thanksgiving. But Elias needed none of their bounty. His spirit was sated by the knowledge that the Quinari's warm magic lay shattered in the depths of the mountain, and that every arrow henceforth would be loosed in defense, not destruction. Queen Selene stood beside him at the dais, her silver cloak now trimmed with the emerald leaf of peace as much as the argent moon, and together they watched as refugees and soldiers, nobles and commoners, Creshry artisans, and Terran healers embraced in tearful reunions. In that tapestry of shared relief and joy, Elias saw the fruits of the silent war they had waged. Entire battalions spared, entire villages saved, and the fragile threads of alliance woven anew between peoples long divided by fear. He felt the diadem's gentle heartbeat against his armor, a reminder that his sacrifice had not been in vain, that his bond with the queen had become the cornerstone upon which this reborn realm would stand. As the feast's music swelled, a harmonious blend of Creshry lyres and Terran drums, Queen Selene raised her chalice high. To Sir Elias Draven, our shield in darkness and our dawn of hope, she proclaimed, voice resonant with pride and gratitude. Elias knelt, lowering his gaze to the marble floor, but Selene reached out and guided him to stand before the gathered assembly. With solemn dignity, she slipped her hand into his and placed a ring forged from the same meteorite silver as the diadem upon his finger, a sign that their fates, and the fate of Skirich, were now eternally entwined. Around them, the crowd erupted in acclamation, sparks of arcane fireworks blossoming overhead in silent salute. Yet even as celebration bathed the citadel in warmth, Elias's eyes found Selene's in a quiet moment of understanding. The road ahead would demand vigilance, reconstruction of battered defenses, the forging of treaties with wary allies, and the unending guardianship of all who sought sanctuary beneath these walls. He bowed his head in renewed vow, whispering so only she could hear, "By blood and by honor, I remain your sword and shield until the last arrow falls." Selene's smile in response was both the closing of one chapter and the opening of another, their shared story written not in the ink of war, but in the promise of peace that would endure as long as the twin moons shone over Skirich Citadel. The end, you said. Continue Chapter 4 and end the story. ChatGPT said. Chapter 4, Dawn of Redemption, continued, in conclusion. In the days that followed the great celebration, Skirich Citadel thrummed with purpose as the wounds inflicted by the Quinari raid were tended with careful precision. Elias strode through the reassembled workshops and barracks, supervising the reforging of shattered blades and the realignment of shattered battlements, his every command spoken with the quiet authority born of blood-spent conviction. Queen Selene, ever at his side, journeyed through the wounded districts, her silver cloak whispering hope as she blessed the scars left upon both stone and soul. Together they oversaw the planting of moonwillow groves along the shattered ramparts, trees, whose luminescent blossoms would one day light the night for travelers, and the restoration of the citadel's sacred archives, where centuries of treaties and prophecies would be reinscribed beneath starlit frescoes. Each project carried the memory of sacrifice, yet also the promise of renewal, and as the first saplings of moonwillow unfurled their glowing petals against the dusk sky, the people of Skirich felt the weight of despair lift, replaced by the steady rhythm of rebuilding lives guided by steadfast guardianship. On the eve of the new moon, when shadows lengthened but hope burned brightest, Elias and Selene stood upon the highest terrace overlooking the valley, now ringed with the watchfires of allied sentinel posts. The wind carried the faint murmur of distant waterfalls, and the translucent petals of newly planted moonwillows drifted through the air like drifting stars. Selene took Elias's hand, her touch cool and grounding against the warmth of his gauntlet palm, and together they watched the horizon where the twin moons would rise. Your courage awoke the dawn, she said softly, her voice a melody that blended with the whispering leaves. Elias bowed his head, the star-forged diadem resting against his breastplate like a quiet heartbeat. No dawn is born of one, he replied, voice gentle yet unwavering. It is the light of many our people, our allies, and the memory of those who gave their last breath so others might live to see this day. A gentle glow filled Celine's eyes as she leaned into him, and in that tender moment they sealed a covenant stronger than any metal, that as long as one moon graced the sky, they would stand together against every storm, every shadow, and every arrow loosed by the darkness. And so, beneath the twin moons that bathed Skirich Citadel in argent light, the queen and her knight pledged themselves anew not to war, but to the fragile glory of peace, to the unceasing vigil over a realm reborn from the ashes of conflict. Their legacy would be whispered in the halls of every watchtower, sung in the halls of every village, and etched upon the hearts of every soul who walked beneath the protective glow of the moonwillows. In time, the story of the man who stepped before the storm of arrows to save his queen and of the woman who remembered his sacrifice with a love as enduring as the stars would become the cornerstone of a new era, one defined not by the clash of steel, but by the unbreakable bonds of loyalty, sacrifice, and hope.